Hello and welcome to another episode of A Different Side of Learning. My name is Shakira Rouse. I'm the creator and founder of Special Compass. And this is a show where weekly we have conversations just talking about everything pertaining to accessibility and education, inclusive education, and just in how we could help ensure that everybody is able to reach their full potential inside and outside the classroom. As always, I have my trusty sidekick, my friend, Danny, for my producer, helping me to join us have this conversation today. Hi, Danny.
Hi.
So today I wanted to talk about transition because it is something definitely important, and I think something that gets overlooked a lot. Understanding the importance of transition, transition planning, especially when it comes to advocating for those students that have exceptional needs inside the classroom, right? So, what is transition? It's something that is unavoidable. Like every student's going to get older. They're going to, once school year is complete, they're going to move on to the next milestone in their academic career. And transition, particularly, we're looking at planning and preparing the student for the changes ahead as they go into higher education. So, like the three, is it three? Yeah, three distinct transition phases. Actually, I would probably say four, depending what the age of the student and where they are on their what kind of exceptionality they have. So, for some students, is a transitioning into school, right? Starting kindergarten, what's that whole routine? For other students, is that transition from going from elementary to middle school, or the you're moving from the junior level to now the intermediate level, which is roughly around grade 6, 7, 8. Then from there, we're going into from uh, elementary to high school, which is another big transition for students. And then from high school onto post-secondary. So when we talk about transition, I don't think people realize is that there's a lot of planning that needs to go into it. It's not like we wait till June of the preceding year to start preparing the student, over the summer for the change. Sometimes there's certain things in this transition stage that need to be started, let's say, maybe when the kid's in grade 4 to get them to ready to go for uh, grade 6 and or grade 7. Maybe it's something we start in grade 7 to get them to be ready for high school. So there's different ways of going about transitioning. Is transition is not going to be the same kind of process for every student, but I think there's a definitely like a blueprint of when it comes to planning and helping students with the transition. So one of definitely the first things I think about when it comes to um, transitioning is like, okay, where is the student right now? Like what are their strengths, what are their areas of needs and support, how are they doing where they are in this stage of uh, where they are. So for example, I think one of the biggest things I get for parents in terms of transitioning is usually around like the middle school, intermediate level, usually around 7, 6, 7, and kind of 8. I think that's when some parents are just like, okay, well, my child, I could tell that they have a really strong interest in math and, they enjoy art and music, but they're having a hard time with like their language skills and certain things in language and their literacy are probably not up to par where they should be for, let's say, grade level, their age level. Um, and parents now kind of worried and concerned about like, hey, what's going to happen when they go into high school? Because I think what people also need to remember is like obviously the workload is going to get intense, and and everything is setting the foundation for the next step. So what is it that do we need to do and think about now in this level that's going to prepare them for high school? Um, so one of the things I do say is like, where is the student at right now in their journey? Like, what are their strengths? What are their needs? What are their interests? That kind of helps to kind of give a sense of okay, how maybe to if we need to do some kind of transition planning, how we're going to do the transition planning, kind of help maybe me as an educator understand how to um, inst- uh, plan my instructions and like lessons and how I'm going to approach this conversation and work with students. So it's definitely understanding where the student's at. And then the next thing I feel like is very important is understanding where the student is going. What's the next step and what is the expectations at that next step. So a lot of times I think people like, they're like high school. Yeah, cool. And there's a lot of just changes when it comes to like going from like elementary to middle school. And sorry, it's just say I'm having this conversation and now I'm also thinking my own personal experience. So for me, when I think about the biggest changes going through school, what which is a shocker to me, was the length of the class, like how like classes became longer in length. And people think that that's okay, but no. Like
And less of a break.
yeah, thank you. Unless of a break, right?
It's
So it
just the
was
straight
like,
exclusion of recess alone.
yes, right? So I mean, so for me, from my experience, when for middle school, for me started in grade 6. I know for some people it starts in grade 7. So middle school is from grade 6, 7, and 8. And when we changed schools, I remember on the first day of school, like we had 3 recesses. That was cool. And then after the first day of school, there was only one recess. And like I was like, no one ever told me this. And like obviously, like I'm 33 now. Like this was still a shocker to me then, and it was a shocker to me now, obviously, because no one tells you that. Yeah, maybe math was like 30 minutes in elementary school, or in like grade 5. Now we're going to like 45 minutes math period, and then when you go to high school, you're going for math for like a whole hour, and then don't even get me started on university lectures that are 3 hours, right? So the time gets the length of the class gets longer, and because it's longer, teachers are going to be teaching more content, right? So if we are not preparing these students for to understand that, hey, I think people understand, like, yes, the work is going to get harder, there's going to be more work and more homework, but I don't think people understand that at certain levels, the higher you uh, going, it's more expectation on the student. It's like they're gonna have to be more in charge of their time. They're gonna have to be more take more charge of doing their homework. They're gonna have to spend more time in doing that homework. And so these little things are gonna also help them to understand that, hey, we need to get organized. So, and you have those students, and this is I don't want to make it seem just like students with exceptionalities, right? There's certain things that are just a part of child development, child and youth development. You always have to remind your kid to like, hey, grab your shoes. Do you have your knapsack? Do you have your lunch bag? But when you're in grade 7, you kind of, you as a parent, you're probably thinking, hey, I want to stop having to remind them of stuff. You're probably still going to have to remind them of certain things. But when they go to high school, you obviously don't want to have to remind them about their homework. Like these are things that they should be taking initiative of and doing themselves. So in that whole concept of transition, going back to my saying that the second step was expectations. Understand that there's a certain expectation for a student at the next level. And it's we have to understand, are they going to be able to meet those expectations? If there's going to be if we assume there's going to be some kind of difficulties meeting those expectations, then this is probably where we need the transition planning of working about how we're going to get them ready for those expectations. How are we going to get them understanding the importance of time management, organization skills, right? How to maybe just kind of, yeah, organization skills, keeping your note folders organized, making notes and keeping all those things succinct, because that's going to help you throughout the year. What you don't want is we get into grade 9, for example, and now we're scrambling because we didn't realize there was all this changes that were coming. In some cases, depending on the student's exceptionality, and this is usually why I know they have like those grade 8, grade 5 info nights at certain times of the school year so that they could see what's going on for the next stage. Um, but they do even offer, like some schools, when part of the transition planning will give students opportunity to come into the school to see where their classes are. You generally, this is kind of, I think this is one of those transition plan that's um, commonly discussed with people that are on the spectrum, but I think it's still a good practice because you have a timetable now. Now you're responsible to going to class. You can't follow your friends because your friends may not have the same class as you, for a second period. You got to figure out where you need to be. So just doing that walkthrough so you can see, okay, this is where I'm going to have math. This is where I'm going to have, history, English. This is where I need to be on such and such days. that is an example of transition planning. That is an example of why um, it's important to start planning and thinking about transition because it's not necessarily just about the academic needs. Sometimes it's most of the time actually it's about the change of environment and then change of expectations. Danny, I know you you were like laughing and commenting about the
Yeah,
no
because
breaks. So what about you?
I just feel like a lot of what gets missed is the actual steps to getting to the transition itself. So just going back to like the whole recess thing. So yes, as you get older, you get less breaks. But like for me personally, frequent breaks was added into my IEP. But one of the
Mhm,
skills that I had to learn was when is it appropriate to take a break so that I'm not missing important things in class, I'm not disrupting the class, and all those kinds of things. And that's not something that you will naturally be able to know as a kid. You go from having three recesses to, depending on what middle school you go to, maybe still having three, maybe having two, maybe only having one. And then in high school, you just have a lunch break. Um, so I would have to get up and leave class and take a little walk around the hall and things like that just to clear my mind so that I wasn't getting overwhelmed. But when do I do that? For example, a time to not do that is right when you're starting to go work on an assignment for class. Why is that not the best time to do that? Because A, if you're in a group project, then your group members are going to be annoyed that you're like gone for 10 minutes. And B, that's also usually the time where people are most confused and the teacher is answering the questions about the instructions that not everybody got. And you don't want to be the one to come back 15 minutes later asking the same questions that three other people just asked. So those are the ways in which transition is super important. Even something as simple as being in high school, because you only have your lunch break, you might have about 5 minutes between classes. Depending on where your classes are, if you have like, let's say, English and then art, is it smarter to bring all of your art supplies to English class because you may or may not have time, depending on where all the classrooms are located, to get between one class or another? Are you the type of student who is going to get distracted in the hallway by your friend that you're passing or a teacher or anything else, or do you need to use the bathroom? All those types of things that you need to learn to plan so that you're at your classes on time. These are all the little pieces in transition that often get overlooked and often aren't planned ahead by not only the teachers, but like parents and the student themselves so that they can start building those skills from before it's needed so that when it's needed, they have them.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, for sure. And I think something you kind of mentioned and touched on about, or I shouldn't say that you mentioned, but it just brought me back to this whole conversation of advocacy. So, a lot of the time at the elementary level, we know that parents are advocating for their kids. As they get older, they need to be start advocating for themselves. So if
Yep.
they know, like you were saying, like I need a break at this time, having to maybe it's even you're advocating for yourself and telling your teacher to say, look, it's in my IP that I have like breaks. I'm gonna do. I don't want to miss vital information. Do you mind that once you've finished explaining all the content, if you're doing independent work, I just take a little bit of time to go out, you know, walk around, do get my break. Advocating, speaking up, and telling people what you need because not everyone's going to be able to know that. And most importantly, like mom and dad are not always going to be there to be able to advocate. So
Mhm.
we need to also in that whole talk about transition planning is helping these kids to be able to advocate for themselves
Yep.
because again when it comes to that transition, right, they're getting older, they're becoming adults. When they come down to the end of it, and this is a big part of the transition where I think people would we say fall through the cracks and get lost. I should say this. I feel like students get lost in transition. This
Mhm.
is where students could fall through the cracks because it's it's not just students with exceptionalities. I would say this, like the changes at every different academic milestones is it's a lot for a lot of students. I've had students that are like straight A students and say they didn't realize that they were going to get so much work in high school, or again that there was so much different extracurricular activities, and now they have to just start managing their time, right? So there's a lot of different things when it comes to transitioning and preparing students for the next step. We're so focused specifically on the academic, but we also need to think about the environmental changes that are going on. How are these are going to because these environmental changes do impact the student success. So going back to helping students with the advocating, so simple like raising your hand, telling them if you have a question, you need help, you need to go to the resource room, raise your hand and let your teacher know. They will, they're going to say, okay, go ahead. Now's a good time. But when, I mean, especially this one, when kids are going to post secondary, you and I know that the whole accommodations process and to get accessibility completely changes. So if we're in this whole transition process, if we're not preparing students to be their self advocate, like to be self advocates, when they go into post secondary, they're going to have a hard time. And I've heard this countless times. Okay, countless times. I actually have two stories about this. So I heard this countless times when people that work in like accessibility offices at the schools, they say that a lot of the times parents are calling and complaining because their child's failing a class and they didn't know and all this kind of stuff, or they want information on how their child did in a report card or something, and they're going to say, "Oh, okay, that's very nice, but I cannot give you any information. It's up to your son or daughter to come, or it's up to your child to come and request accommodations. It's up to your child to share that information with you, or if they, fill out a form and grant us permission, sure, we can." Long story short is that at the post secondary level, students are seen as an adult. So parents cannot come and ask for information like they were doing in, elementary and a secondary school. They cannot be requesting meetings because they could go into the school and the school's officials will say, okay, yeah, that's cool, that's nice. But if you want this, your child needs to be here advocating for themselves. And that's where a lot of things get lost in transition because some students don't realize what they're entitled to at that level. They don't know how to advocate for themselves at that level. And I'm a prime example of that. That's where I had encountered a hard time in my when I was doing my first degree, is because I didn't know that there was accommodations on campus and a department dedicated to helping students with exceptionalities. Because I didn't know this, I wasn't advocating for myself. And once I've learned this, I've been able to become a stronger and more effective advocate for myself. And so it's very interesting to me, and I say this because I've been to other open houses at the post on campuses, and um, I've seen the same thing all the time. I think it's really great for parents to be supportive of the child's education. And I get, you're doing campus tours, but even sometimes I think there's a point where parents also need to step back and
Mhm.
allow your child to be asking the questions, allow your child to be engaging. And I say this particularly if your child entering the graduate level, where they're going to get a master's, right? Um, Again, a lot of times I've heard it from other officials that work in those departments. It's a lot of the times the parents are questioning and want to ask questions and the school is saying no, they can't, it's their students responsibility. So we need to be embedding transition and helping in transitioning planning for students, helping them to be able to advocate for themselves, helping them to be independent learners, resourceful learners, so that they're able to problem solve, navigate the different systems on their own with confidence. And that's a key thing, with confidence. I mean, we're good. Everyone has to, learn certain experience certain things in life from themselves, and we're gonna make mistakes, and that's fine. But we need to be able to give them the confidence, instill that confidence within them, that they're able to navigate and problem solve on their own the different challenges that come up in their academic career, and be able to find a solution, no problem. Just to kind of recap, like the first step is also understand where the students at, to understand the next expectations at the next level, and helping them to and implementing advocacy skills. I think that's a key thing too in that transition where now we're also helping these students to understand what they're entitled to, what their resort options are or resources are, to get them support, and how they need to be voicing their needs and accommodations and what it is that's going to help them to be an effective learner. So if I could just leave one tidbit to kind of for you on this journey of just understanding everything of the different side of learning and transition is that when it comes to transition planning, it's not just the academics that need to be addressed. Is we need to also start planning and understand the environmental changes and all the environmental changes and all the factors that come with it. So even planning, again, to even sometimes students, I have students that were worried about what it's going to be like when they go to middle school, worried about high school. So helping students to cope with the mental health and wellness of the transition and the stress and anxieties and worries that are surrounded with this change. And I think that's very important because as much as we talk, some people don't like it, we try to fight it. Like transition is another word for change, and change is something that's unavoidable in life, so it's going to happen. So we just need to be able to embrace the change and embrace the change with grace and compassion with ourselves. We could plan as much as we want. Sometimes we're still going to have a little bit of hiccups, but I think it's important to have compassion with ourselves and um, compassion with ourselves and grace as we're doing this transition of change. So, thank you for tuning in with us this week on a different sides of learning. Tune in next week, or we're going to talk about a different topic and ways that we can help build more inclusive world and our society where everyone is reaching their full potential. So have a good week.
Bye.